I still remember the exact sound my shoes made on that cracked pavement, a flapping, tired rhythm that followed me everywhere like an unwanted sidekick. They were my uncle's son's old sneakers, 2 sizes too big, 1 lace missing, and a hole near the toe that let the dust kiss my skin every step of the way. If poverty had a soundtrack, it would be that flap-flap noise echoing behind me. My cousins used to joke that I didn't need to take off my shoes to feel the wind. Funny thing is, they weren't wrong. I could feel every stone, every rough patch of earth through those thin soles. I'd laugh with them sometimes. What else could I do? Crying would only prove them right. Our family was the kind that gathered every Sunday, where the grown-ups pretended to be polite, and the kids mirrored their smirks. There was always a hierarchy in the air, an invisible seating chart based on money, cars, and college admissions. I was somewhere near the bottom, next to the dog, if the dog was having a good day. When you're the poor relative, you learn to make yourself small. You time your laughter so it doesn't interrupt theirs. You speak only when spoken to, and you train your eyes to find beauty in leftovers, half a slice of cake, a hand-me-down jacket, a compliment that might or might not be a pity gift. But in those quiet moments, when the house emptied and I was finally alone with the echo of their laughter, I made promises to myself, not loud ones, just soft, secret vows whispered into the corners of my pillow, that someday I'd buy shoes that didn't squeak. Someday I'd walk into those Sunday dinners without needing permission to sit at the grown-ups table. Of course, back then, that felt impossible. Dreams like that were reserved for people who already had the luxury of options. I didn't even have enough for bus fare most weeks. But the thing about being underestimated is, it's fuel. It burns slow, but it burns steady. I worked small jobs around town, cleaning the community hall, stacking boxes, even helping the butcher's wife carry meat from her car. Every dollar I earned felt like proof that I existed beyond their pity. Sometimes I'd count the bills late at night, flattening each one carefully like it was sacred. I told myself, one day these hands won't just carry someone else's load, they'll build something of their own. And every time my cousins laughed at my shoes, I smiled back, memorizing the sound of their voices. Not out of bitterness, at least not yet. It was more like collecting receipts, for future reference, because deep down, I knew something they didn't. Even if I couldn't afford new shoes, I was already running faster than they ever imagined I could. They just hadn't noticed yet. That hole in my shoe wasn't a weakness, it was a window. Through it, I saw the kind of life I wanted, and I was ready to walk until my feet bled to reach it. Sunday dinners were the closest thing our family had to a royal ceremony. There was always a roast chicken, a mountain of mashed potatoes, and a hierarchy that arrived before the food did. The elders sat at the long table, silverware clinking in choreographed rhythm. The successful cousins compared internships and vacations, their words glazed with self-importance. And me, I was the one making sure I didn't spill gravy on the borrowed shirt. The air always smelled like roasted garlic and quiet judgment. You could taste both if you paid attention. I remember the first time I realized those dinners weren't really about family. They were a performance. Everyone came to show what they'd gained, and to notice what others hadn't. Aunt May bragged about her daughter's business minor like it was the Nobel Prize. Uncle Harold talked about buying a second car, as if anyone asked. Then someone would turn to me, fork paused mid-air, and ask, "So, how's everything?" Everything. The polite substitute for we don't expect much, but we have to ask. I'd smile, say something vague about keeping busy, and let their attention drift away like it always did. Sometimes I'd imagine a voiceover narrating the scene, something like, "And here sits the poor cousin," trying not to choke on invisible expectations. There was a rhythm to it all, the laughter that came a second too late, the pity disguised as advice, the small talk that ended just before dessert. I started treating it like a study. Every remark, every smirk, became data. If success was a language, I was learning its grammar by observation. Once, my cousin Greg dropped a joke about my shoes. Again, just as I reached for the bread, he said, "Careful, you might scuff the floor. We don't have insurance for that." Everyone laughed like it was harmless, and I laughed too, but quietly. Not because it was funny, but because I finally understood something. Their laughter wasn't about me. It was about keeping their own insecurities alive. See, when people need someone to look down on, it's rarely about the person below. It's about their fear of falling. After dinner, I'd help clean up, partly out of habit, partly because I liked staying behind when the house got quiet again. The clatter of dishes was better than the clatter of egos. Aunt May once told me, "You're so humble, dear." I almost corrected her. "No, Aunt May, I'm just tired." That night, as I walked home under the orange streetlights, my stomach full but my pride gnawed hollow, I caught my reflection in a puddle. The shoes again, muddy, worn, defiant, and for some reason, I smiled, because deep down, I knew they wouldn't be laughing forever. They were too busy standing still, and I was already walking flap flap toward something they couldn't see yet. Funny how silence can taste sweeter than dessert when it's filled with quiet determination. The turning point came in the shape of a sentence, one thrown so casually across the dinner table that nobody else even noticed it land. It was my cousin Greg again, the family's golden boy, with his tailored blazer and the permanent smirk of someone who believed success was genetic. He'd just come home from university in the city, majoring in business something, and that night, he decided to play philosopher. He leaned back in his chair, wiped his mouth with his napkin like he was closing a board meeting, and said, "You know, some people are just built ordinary. They'll never stand out, no matter how hard they try." The table chuckled politely. No one said my name, but every glance pointed in my direction like invisible arrows. I laughed too, because what else could I do? But that night, when I got home, the words stayed with me, replaying in my head like an annoying pop song that won't quit. Built ordinary, as if I came off some factory line that specialized in mediocrity. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the times I'd swallowed moments like that, the quiet humiliations, the side comments, the soft laughter that followed me out the door, and something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was more like a spark flickering under the weight of years of dust. For the first time, I stopped dreaming about proving them wrong. I started dreaming about proving myself right. That's a subtle but powerful difference. When you chase revenge, you move backward, toward them. When you chase purpose, you move forward, toward you. The next morning, I went to the old library in town, the one that still smelled like paper and ambition, and I began reading everything I could about business, finance, marketing. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew it wasn't pity. At night, I'd watch YouTube videos of people talking about startups, real estate, investing. I didn't understand half the words at first, but I kept going. If Greg was built different, then fine, I'd rebuild myself. One evening, while scrolling job boards on a second-hand laptop that sounded like a jet engine, I found an ad for a small construction company in the city looking for an assistant. It paid terribly, but it offered something better than money: proximity. To people who knew things I didn't. To places where success wasn't just a story told at dinner tables. I applied, packed a small bag, and left 3 days later. No farewell party, no hugs, no tearful goodbyes. Just a short note on the fridge. "Thanks for the meals, I'll bring dessert next time." On the bus, I watched the town fade into a blur through the scratched window. The street lamps turned into streaks of gold. The sound of the tires on the road reminded me of my old shoes. That same rhythm of movement, of leaving something behind but not yet knowing what's ahead. Funny how life's biggest decisions don't come with fanfare. Sometimes it's just a quiet voice whispering, "Enough." And as the bus carried me toward a future still covered in fog, I smiled to myself for the first time in years. Because Greg was right about one thing: I was built differently, just not in the way he thought. Leaving home felt like walking barefoot across a long stretch of uncertainty, painful at first, but strangely freeing once I stopped looking back. My pockets were nearly empty: $87, 2 crumpled job application forms, and a bus ticket that said one way. But my mind was loud with plans. The city hit me like cold rain, fast, uninviting, and always in motion. Buildings towered like silent judges. Everyone seemed to have somewhere urgent to be, and I was just another face trying not to look lost. I slept in a shared hostel that smelled like detergent and desperation, where dreams were the only thing we could afford unlimited. My first job was exactly what the ad promised: assistant to everyone and everything. I ran errands, fetched coffee, carried boxes, and answered phones in an office where the copy machine had more authority than I did. Still, I was grateful. Every morning I'd put on my one decent shirt, the collar frayed like my nerves, and tell myself, this is not forever. The boss, Mr. Klein, was a man of few words and fewer smiles, but he had a way of speaking about business deals that made my head spin, in a good way. I started staying late just to listen when he talked to clients, scribbling notes behind the reception desk like a secret student. At night, I'd reread them in my bunk, imagining myself someday sitting across that same table, not taking notes but signing contracts. The first few months were brutal. There were days I skipped lunch to save money, nights I fell asleep mid-sentence with a book still open on my chest. But exhaustion became a kind of rhythm, a drumbeat that said, you're still moving. It wasn't glamorous, but it was progress. Sometimes, when things got hard, I'd think about my family. Not with anger, more like curiosity. Did they ever wonder where I'd gone? Did Greg still wear that smug grin at dinner, or did someone else take my place as the family's easy punchline? The thought made me laugh quietly into my pillow. If they only knew that the ordinary one was now learning how to build empires from the ground up. One evening I was walking home through the drizzle when I passed a store window. Behind the glass, a pair of brand new brown leather shoes sat under the soft glow of display lights. They looked nothing like my old ones, sturdy, confident, silent. The tag said $149, a price that felt, at that time, like $1 million. Still, I stood there for a long minute, staring at them, not with envy, just acknowledgement. A quiet promise to come back for them someday, not when I needed them, but when I deserved them. It's strange how the city can both break you and rebuild you at the same time. Each rejection, each overtime shift, each late-night instant noodle became a layer, thicker skin, steadier hands, sharper mind. I started seeing patterns in chaos, opportunities in setbacks. While others complained about bad bosses, I studied how those bosses thought. While they scrolled social media, I scrolled real estate listings I couldn't yet afford, just to learn the language of success. And somewhere in those sleepless months, something quietly clicked. I didn't just want a better life, I wanted control. Control over time, over choices, over the kind of table where people like Greg would someday sit across from me, on the other side of the deal. So, I stopped chasing approval and started building leverage. One odd job, one late night, one sacrifice at a time. And though I didn't know it yet, every small brick I laid in those years would soon become the foundation of something big enough to make even my past self blink in disbelief. The first few years of building something from nothing don't look like success. They look like coffee stains on paperwork, like sleepless eyes staring at spreadsheets that don't add up yet. Like noodles eaten out of the same pan because washing dishes costs time you can't afford to lose. I moved from the construction office to a small side project with a few co-workers, an idea that was half foolish, half brilliant. We wanted to buy, repair, and flip small houses in forgotten neighborhoods. None of us had money, just stubbornness and Wi-Fi. So we worked from a basement that smelled like wet cardboard, using folding tables as desks and optimism as currency. Every night, I went home so tired that even my dreams looked like spreadsheets. But exhaustion began to feel like evidence. If I was this tired, I must be getting somewhere. The funny part, my fridge was empty except for soy sauce, but I talked to it anyway. It hummed. I ranted. That was our friendship. Sometimes I'd tell it about our deals falling through, and it would answer with that same low whir of sympathy. Honestly, it was the best listener I ever had. During the day, I was learning everything: how to read contracts, how to talk to investors without sounding desperate, how to smile while being told no for the 10th time. I started noticing how the wealthy carried silence like armor, how they let pauses do the talking. So I practiced. Every time someone underestimated me, I paused just long enough for them to feel it. Power, I realized, often begins with the patience to stay quiet. Then came the deal that nearly broke us. A crumbling 2-story property, roof leaking, walls warped, backyard swallowed by weeds. Everyone else saw a disaster. I saw myself, a few years earlier, ugly beginnings, but still standing. We spent 3 months fixing that house with borrowed tools and borrowed hope. I painted until my arms trembled, slept in the empty living room when the last train left, and prayed the neighbors wouldn't notice our lights still burning at 3 a.m. By the time we sold it, we made just enough profit to pay rent and buy groceries. Nothing glamorous, but it was proof. Proof that the world would trade effort for outcome, even if it was slow. I sent a small portion of that first paycheck home, not because anyone asked, but because I wanted to know how it felt to give without expecting thanks. Aunt May texted back a polite "thank you, dear." Greg didn't text at all. Typical. I laughed, leaned back in my chair, and looked at my hands. They were rougher now, more calloused, but also steadier. Each scar had a story. Each blister had built something real. One night, when everyone else had gone home, I stood outside the same house we'd fixed, the disaster that became our first victory. The windows glowed warm from the new family that had moved in. I imagined a kid running through those halls, maybe wearing old shoes, but still smiling. And for the first time, I felt something close to peace. Of course, peace never lasts long when ambition's in your veins. Within weeks, I was already planning the next project, the next risk, the next step forward, because now I'd tasted progress, and nothing tastes more addictive. I still couldn't afford those brown leather shoes from the store window, but now when I passed by them, I didn't think of what I lacked. I thought of what was coming, and deep down, I knew, someday soon, those shoes wouldn't just fit, they'd belong. Success rarely arrives with fireworks. Sometimes it just knocks softly, like a polite guest who isn't sure they're welcome yet. It happened one chilly morning, when I opened my email and saw a message titled, "Proposal accepted." No confetti, no champagne, just those 2 words and a quiet click of realization. After years of late nights, missed meals, and silent prayers whispered to a humming fridge, our little renovation company had landed its first big investor, the kind who didn't pay in promises, but in zeros. For a long time, I just stared at the screen. The cursor blinked, almost teasing me. You did it. And in that moment I laughed, too loud, too long, alone in that basement that had once felt like a coffin. Now it felt like a cradle. That night, I walked to the city center and bought myself dinner that didn't come in a cup. Then I passed by the shoe store, the same one that had once held my silent promise. The brown leather pair was still there, same soft glow, same price tag, except this time, I didn't flinch. I walked in, tried them on, and felt the world tilt slightly under my feet. They fit perfectly. When I took my first step in them, the sound was different. No more flap, no more hollow echo, just a steady, confident click against the floor. It was ridiculous, maybe even sentimental, but that sound nearly brought tears to my eyes. Not because they were shoes, but because they were proof. I walked home slowly that night, listening to each step as if it were music. And somewhere between those quiet clicks, I realized something simple but profound. The opposite of poverty isn't wealth. It's dignity. Of course, success didn't suddenly make life easier, it just made the problems more expensive. Contracts needed renegotiation, staff needed management, taxes needed a translator, apparently. But for once, I wasn't surviving, I was building. The company grew faster than I could catch my breath. We moved from the basement to a proper office with actual windows. My name went on the door, not big, but bold enough to make me smile every morning. My business partner joked that I'd become a walking LinkedIn post. I told him if I ever start using hashtags unironically, please stage an intervention. He laughed, and I laughed too, but part of me knew how surreal it was to be here, laughing at all. And yet, amid all that progress, there were still moments when the past crept in quietly, like a faint echo from another lifetime. When someone dismissed my opinion in a meeting, I'd feel that old sting of being talked over at family dinners. When people complimented my humility, I'd remember Aunt May's soft condescension. Funny how memories cling like lint. You can brush them off, but they never really disappear. Then one afternoon, during a site inspection, I got a call from a number I hadn't seen in years. It was my mother's voice, small but bright. She said, "Your uncle's selling the old family house. The one with the Sunday dinners, the smirks, the jokes, the invisible hierarchy. The one where I learned to laugh while swallowing humiliation. That house wasn't just wood and bricks. It was an entire chapter of who I used to be." For a long while, I didn't say anything. Then I asked softly, "How much?" She told me it was less than 1 month's profit for me now. When I hung up, I sat there for a full hour, staring at nothing, letting the irony sink in. The same house that once reminded me of everything I lacked was now something I could buy without blinking. And yet, it wasn't about money anymore. It was about symmetry, about closing a circle that had started with a hole in my shoe. That night, I didn't celebrate. I didn't even smile. I just stood by the window, city lights flickering below me, and whispered the same word I'd once whispered as a promise: soon. 3 weeks later, I returned to the town I once escaped from. 3 weeks later, I returned to the town I once escaped from. The bus ride felt shorter this time, maybe because I wasn't running away anymore. I was arriving. It's funny how the same road can look different when you've changed. The town hadn't aged well. The same cracked sidewalks, the same grocery store sign missing 2 letters, the same quiet rhythm of small lives looping endlessly. But me, I'd become a different creature entirely, one who no longer flinched when people looked too long. When I stepped off the bus, I half expected the ghosts of my past to be waiting there. The laughter, the stares, the unspoken hierarchy. Instead, I was greeted by silence, thick and oddly peaceful. I checked into a modest hotel, the kind with floral curtains and carpets that always smell faintly of lemon cleaner, and sent a message to my mother: "Home tomorrow. Don't tell anyone yet." I wanted to walk through town unseen, like a shadow taking inventory of old memories. The next day I drove past the familiar landmarks, the park where we used to play tag until the streetlights came on, the library that once gave me warmth and free Wi-Fi, and then, the house, their house. It looked smaller than I remembered, though maybe it was my perspective that had grown. The white paint had faded into a tired beige. The porch creaked like an old confession. For a moment I just stood there, watching the curtains move slightly, as if the past itself was peeking through. I met my uncle and aunt later that evening. They were polite, overly so, the kind of politeness that hides discomfort. Uncle Harold had grown grayer, Aunt May thinner. They asked the usual questions: where I lived, what I did, if I was married yet. I gave the usual vague answers, and then came Greg. He still had that smirk, slightly duller now, like a trophy that hadn't been polished in years. We shook hands. His grip was firm, performative, the kind meant to say I'm still doing fine. But I could feel the faint tremor underneath, so he said, trying for casual, "Heard you're doing something with houses." I smiled. Something like that. He laughed, a short nervous chuckle, then looked away. The tables had turned, but I wasn't here for revenge. Not exactly. I just wanted to see, to stand in front of the life that once made me feel small and realize that it couldn't reach me anymore. That night, I joined them for dinner, one last Sunday ritual. Same table, same chandelier, same roles, but the script had changed. The roast chicken was still dry, but the silence afterward was different, heavier, like everyone could sense that the invisible hierarchy had quietly collapsed. Greg tried to joke about my old shoes again, but the words came out softer this time, unsure of their footing. And when I laughed, it wasn't forced, it was real, light, almost kind, because now, I could afford generosity. After dessert, Aunt May patted my hand. "It's good to see you doing well, dear," she said, and for the first time, I believed she meant it. Maybe not entirely, but at least halfway, and that was enough. When I stepped outside, the air smelled of rain and distant wood smoke. The moonlight glinted off the windows of the house I'd just quietly placed an offer on. In a few weeks it would be mine, and I didn't plan to tear it down or redecorate it beyond recognition. No, I'd let it stand exactly as it was, a living museum of lessons learned. I took one last look at the porch, where a younger me once stood, invisible and barefoot in borrowed shoes. Then I whispered into the wind, "I'm home," and this time, The silence didn't hurt. It hummed, like an old song I finally knew the words to. Buying the house felt surreal, like walking into a memory and signing ownership papers for your own ghosts. The process was fast, almost suspiciously smooth. Money, I've learned, is the best kind of lubricant in life's bureaucratic gears. Within 2 weeks, the contract was signed, notarized, sealed. The house that once echoed with laughter at my expense was now mine, legally, financially. The day I got the keys, I didn't tell anyone. No announcement, no victory post, no look who's laughing now. Revenge, I'd realized, doesn't need an audience, it just needs silence and a solid deed in your name. I parked across the street and sat in my car for a long time, watching the front door. Same chipped paint, same rusty mailbox with our last name still faintly visible. If walls could talk, I'm sure they'd have started whispering apologies. When I finally stepped inside, the air smelled like old wood and faint memories. I half expected to see my younger self in the corner, holding a paper plate and pretending not to notice the jokes, but he was gone. All that remained was the echo, and me, taller now, stronger, quieter. The rooms hadn't changed much. The same wallpaper my aunt swore she'd replace one day. The same dent on the hallway wall where Greg had once thrown a football and blamed me. I ran my fingers along the old wooden banister and whispered, well, guess who came back? There's a strange peace in reclaiming the places that once rejected you. It's not about power, it's about closure. Like stitching up an old wound you'd long stopped noticing. Later that week, I met with a local property agent and arranged a new rental contract for my uncle and aunt. They had no idea who the buyer was. They only knew the new landlord had offered them a generous lease extension. I even reduced the rent a little, just enough to make it kind. Cruelty, after all, was never the goal. When the papers were ready, I used my initials instead of my full name. It wasn't secrecy, it was theater. I wanted the reveal to happen naturally, the way truth sometimes slips out when no one's ready for it. The moment came sooner than I thought. I was back in the city when Aunt May called. A voice trembled between politeness and disbelief. "Dear, you'll never believe this," she said. "The man who bought the house has your initials." I smiled into the phone. "What a coincidence," I said. "Yes, and, well, the rent's reasonable. Thank heavens. At least the new owner has a heart." "I'm sure he does," I replied softly. It took them another month to find out. Greg was the first to piece it together. His ego, ironically, made him the family detective. He called me one evening, voice tight with restrained panic. "Is it true? You bought the house?" "Yes," I said. "I thought it'd make a good investment." "But why that house?" "Oh, you know me," I said, smiling. Sentimental. He didn't respond right away. The silence that followed was thick enough to taste, and for the first time, I heard something in his voice that had never existed before. Not arrogance, not mockery, just respect. Uneasy, unsteady, but real. After the call, I sat in my office and looked out at the city lights. They shimmered like fragments of the past, scattered but harmless now. I thought about how far I'd come, from counting coins for bus fare to counting properties. And yet, the most satisfying part wasn't the wealth. It was knowing that I no longer needed their validation. Money can buy houses, but dignity, you have to earn that one, brick by brick, silence by silence. The next morning I took a quiet drive back to town. As I stood outside the old house again, watching the lights flicker through its familiar windows, I smiled. The laughter that once haunted me now felt like background music, faint, irrelevant. The house didn't belong to them anymore. But somehow, it no longer belonged to my pain either. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest memories. Months passed after I bought the house, and with each passing day, the edges of my resentment dulled a little more. I didn't forgive them, at least not out loud. But the ache that used to live in my chest began to fade into something quieter, almost nostalgic. The rent payments came in like clockwork. Every month their names appeared on the transaction list, small digital reminders of how far the tables had turned. Sometimes, when I saw Gregory H. in the statement line, I chuckled softly, imagining his face when he typed it. He'd probably hit send with the same energy someone uses to swallow bitter medicine. Still, I didn't gloat. Not in person, not online. I let silence do the bragging for me. It's amazing how much louder peace sounds when you've earned it the hard way. Around that time, my business started expanding faster than I'd planned. What began as a freelance hustle had evolved into a full-fledged company, complete with employees, contracts, and a painfully expensive espresso machine no one knew how to use. Ironically, Greg applied for a project manager position there through an agency without realizing whose company it was. When his resume landed on my desk, I nearly spit out my coffee. I stared at the name for a long time, my cursor hovering over the reject button. Then, for reasons I still can't quite explain, I scheduled him for an interview. Maybe I wanted to see his face when he realized, or maybe I just wanted closure in a different way. The day of the interview, he walked into my office wearing the same smug confidence I remembered, only thinner now, worn down by time. His eyes widened the moment he saw me. "Oh," he said quietly. "Hi, Greg," I replied, leaning back in my chair. Long time, he blinked, his mouth opening and closing like a fish caught off guard. "I didn't know you owned this place," I finished. "Yeah, life's funny like that." He tried to recover, forcing a laugh that didn't quite land. "I guess it is." I offered him a seat and slid his resume back across the table. "Your experience is solid," I said. "But tell me, what have you learned since the last time we met?" It wasn't sarcasm, it was an honest question, and to his credit, Greg didn't dodge it. He sighed, looked down at his hands, and said, "That money doesn't last when you treat people like they don't matter." For a second, I saw the boy he used to be, the one hidden beneath all the swagger and cruelty. "I'll keep that in mind," I said quietly. He nodded. When he left, I didn't hire him, but I didn't reject him cruelly either. I simply sent a polite message later that week. "We've chosen another candidate. Wishing you the best." And I meant it. That night, I went for a long drive. The city lights flickered against my windshield like tiny reflections of old dreams. Ones that had finally come true but somehow felt lighter than I'd imagined. Revenge, I realized, isn't about watching someone fall, it's about rising so high you no longer need them to look up. I stopped by the house again, just to see it. It looked smaller than I remembered, like childhood toys do when you find them years later. Aunt May was watering the garden, her movements slow and careful. When she saw me, her face softened. "Oh, it's you," she said. We heard it's your company now." I smiled gently. "Yeah, things worked out." She hesitated, then said quietly, "Your mother would have been proud." That caught me off guard. It had been years since anyone mentioned my mum in that tone. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. "Thanks," I finally managed. The air between us hung heavy with things we both understood but didn't need to say. As I drove away, I felt something shift inside me, like a final thread snapping loose. The bitterness, the humiliation, the long-held ache, they all loosened their grip, fading into the hum of the tires on the road. I didn't need an apology. Owning that house, running my company, building my own peace, that was enough. The past had done its job. It pushed me to become someone I might never have been without it. And now, it was time to stop carrying it. By the time I reached the city, I was smiling again. Not the sharp smile of victory, but the kind that comes when you finally, quietly, let go. The following spring, I decided to visit the house one last time. Not as a landlord, not as the poor relative turned success story, but simply as a person saying goodbye. I parked in the same spot I used to stand as a kid, just far enough to see the gate but not be seen from the porch. It felt almost poetic, coming full circle, only to walk away by choice. The air was soft that morning, the kind that smells faintly of wet soil and sunlight. Birds chattered above the roof like gossiping neighbors, and for the first time, I didn't feel like an outsider in that scene, just at peace. Greg came out with a trash bag, looking older, a little rounder, but calmer somehow. He spotted me and froze, then gave a small wave, awkward, tentative, but real. I waved back, no words, we didn't need any. Everything that needed saying had already been said in the silence of the years that passed. I stayed for a few minutes, just breathing, just remembering. All those nights when I'd sworn I'd make them regret ever laughing at me. And now, standing there, I realized regret wasn't the point anymore. Growth was, freedom was, and maybe, deep down, gratitude too, because without them, I might never have learned what I was truly worth. That night, I came home and opened the old box where I'd kept the only photo of us together. All of us smiling, arms linked, me wearing those infamous broken shoes. I used to hate that picture. Now I just smiled at it. It reminded me that every story of triumph starts with a little humiliation. I slipped the photo into a frame and placed it on my bookshelf, not as a trophy, but as a compass pointing backward, reminding me where not to return. Life, I've learned, doesn't hand out justice neatly wrapped in bows. Sometimes, it gives you a mess and waits to see what you'll build from it. And I built something beautiful, even if it started from ruin. Nowadays, when my team asks what motivates me, I don't mention the family drama or the house. I just say, I like building things that last. Because that's what healing really is. Construction, not demolition. And sometimes, when I drive past that town, I still slow down near the old street. The house is there, with new paint, a new roof, new flowers by the gate. It's alive again. And though it's technically mine, it feels like it belongs to time now, to all the versions of us who lived, fought, and learned within its walls. One evening, I walked through it quietly, no one home, just the hum of evening light spilling through dusty windows. I touched the railing, the old dent in the wall, the door frame with the scratches marking our heights as kids. I traced my own initials there and whispered, "Thank you, for everything you taught me, even the painful parts." Then I locked the door gently, turned the key, and walked away for the last time. Not out of pride, not out of spite, but out of peace. Because the thing about being the poor relative is this: you spend years trying to prove you deserve a seat at the table, until one day you realize you've built your own table, and you don't need to invite anyone at all. So I drove off, windows down, breeze in my hair, the horizon blurring into gold, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was running from anything. I was simply moving forward, quietly, steadily, and completely free. Let's slow down here. You can almost hear the sound of gravel beneath the tires, fading into the soft hum of distance. The story lingers in the air like dust caught in sunlight. Tiny, weightless, golden. You followed every echo, every sting, every soft laugh of irony. And now, all that's left is calm. The house is behind you. The road ahead stretches like silk under the moonlight. There's no need for revenge anymore, only rest. Because success, when you've truly earned it, doesn't shout. It breathes quietly, like the wind through open windows. You can picture it now, the old garden, the chipped fence, the boy who once stood barefoot in broken shoes, and the adult who finally learned that dignity doesn't require witnesses. Breathe in, slowly. The weight of old memories softens on your chest. Breathe out, gently. Let them drift away like autumn leaves, floating where they need to go. Tonight there's no past to chase, no laughter to outshine. Only the simple peace of knowing you made it. You built something lasting from the pieces they once mocked. And as you drift into sleep, let that image stay, a quiet road, fading light, and the sound of your own steady heartbeat, telling you that you've arrived.